Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gareth Newham, and I head the Justice and Violence Prevention Program here at the Institute for Security Studies in Pretoria. Thank you very much for joining our seminar this morning, and to the online audience as well. Today's seminar is focused on what can be done and what is being done to tackle corruption in the South African Police Service. It has long been realized that corruption is an occupational hazard that faces just about every police agency in the world. The challenge really most police agencies face is the extent of the problem. The reason why corruption happens, or is likely to happen in many police agencies, is that, as we know after many years of studying this phenomenon, that corruption tends to occur when some individuals have a level of authority or power over others. They have the discretion as to when they can exercise that authority, and there's an absence of accountability or inadequate accountability. If those three factors are present, you could find yourself with a corruption problem. Of course, the police are given greater legal powers and authorities than most citizens. They are trained in the use of force, they're equipped, and their job is to enforce the law. So they are able to make decisions about when they search and seize goods that they believe to be stolen, when they stop and search you, when they arrest you if they think you've been involved in a crime, enter your house. And a lot of this takes place in private spaces, in people's homes, sometimes at night under the cover of darkness. So the issue of accountability is a vexed one that always challenges policing agencies. So you'll always have some number of individuals in every police agency who will use that situation, the powers they have over others, in their own private interests and not in the interest of the police or the general public. Now, the extent to whether a police agency is corrupt or not is not a simple one to solve, but one of the key issues is of accountability. And that is what today's seminar is going to be focusing on. We heard a few years ago that the South African Police Service would be re-establishing an anti-corruption unit or an integrity unit, and decided that it would be an opportune time to look back at the lessons learned from the original South African Police Service Anti-Corruption Unit that existed between 1996 and 2002, before it was shut down by Jackie Selebi, who was later convicted for corruption and sentenced to 15 years in prison, which might have had something to do with the decision to shut down the Anti-Corruption Unit. But that Anti-Corruption Unit was seen as one of the examples of a good unit of its type internationally. And so we got together with the former head, and I'll introduce the panel in a moment, to look at the lessons that can be learned, to make sure that any new attempt to re-establish such a unit would benefit from those lessons. But of course, corruption is not just about accountability. It's also about the tone set in the organization at the top. So if you have the right leadership in a policing organization, not only will they make sure that the mechanisms for holding police accountable are fair, effective, functioning, so that police officers know that if they do get involved in wrongdoing, that they're likely to be removed from the police agency, and their honest colleagues can be rest assured that those that undermine the badge and the uniform will be dealt with and not further undermine public confidence in the police. But that you need to be a role model. You need to be able to demonstrate by your actions and your deeds what a professional police officer looks like, so that everybody in the organization, when they look at their leadership, know how to behave and how to act. And for that reason, I just want to draw attention quickly to a campaign that ourselves with Corruption Watch are running around the appointment of the new National Commissioner. This pamphlet is available out there with all the other materials. Please take a look at it. It really just calls for the implementation of the National Development Plan recommendations, that the President only appoint a National Commissioner, and we also say the head of the Hawks, following a merit-based, transparent, competitive process, so that we get the best possible man or woman whose integrity is beyond reproach and who has the expertise to lead policing in South Africa. We also have a survey on this, and we would like you all to participate in the survey. You can go to our website and say what you would like to see in terms of the characteristics, attributes, and what the priorities of a National Commissioner should be. We'll be releasing the results of that survey in a couple of months in another event. But we are very honored and happy today to have a panel of people who are highly experienced in both policing and tackling policing in South Africa. People who really have spent a lot of their time getting to grips with what does it take to ensure that police are held accountable in a positive way, so that we can have an organization that is highly respected and trusted by the public because it is staffed by men and women who are passionate about community safety and use their considerable powers in the interests of the communities that they serve. And so today, I'm very happy to welcome Brigadier Hercules Wasserman, who's the Section Head of Integrity Management at the South African Police Service, and he'll be talking about the various initiatives that the South African Police Service are undertaking to deal with corruption and promote integrity in the South African Police Service. We also have a retired Brigadier Stefan Grobler, who's a former commander of the Anti-Corruption Unit, which at its heyday was arresting in the region of about 6,000 police officials a year and able to investigate and lead to the conviction of well over 1,000 police officials for corruption, and led one of the units that was internationally recognized as a good example of its kind. We were hoping to have Robert McBride, the head of the executive director of the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, and he was just been called away to another responsibility. But we're very fortunate to have Mr. Sissoko, who's the national head of investigations of the Independent Police Investigative Directorate. And so he will also speak a bit about the work that this very important organization, this institution that is set up by the Constitution, the role they play in addressing police misconduct and corruption. And we will also have a short input by my colleague. We all know Dr. Johan Berger, who also has 36 years of operational police experience and over a decade studying policing and looking at issues to do with policing and accountability more broadly. Before I hand over to the panel, I just want to thank our sponsors. The Hans Seidel Foundation and the Open Society Foundation fund a lot of the work we do in policing, and we're hugely grateful for their support. I also want to just mention the members of the ISS Partnership Forum that fund the organization more broadly. There's the governments of Australia, Canada, Denmark, Finland, Ireland, Japan, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and the United States of America. On your seat, you'll see evaluation forms. Please take a minute just to fill them in at the end of the seminar. Your feedback is valuable to us so that we can improve our events. After we've had the panel inputs, we will then have a question and answer session, and people will be free to make comments and engage with the panelists and the things they said, and then we will end and take lunch. So without further ado, I would like to welcome, who's actually going first? So it's Dr. Johan Berger to the podium to start off the presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gareth. Thanks, Gareth, for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here. My presentation is going to be relatively short compared to some of the other panels who have hour-long briefings. But so I'm going to be short to allow them time to do their briefings. But the main aim, I think, of my briefing and of my former colleague, Stef Grobler, is in a way to introduce the policy brief that we jointly wrote about the need for an internal anti-corruption unit. Now, as you will see there at the top of the next screen, why we undertook this initiative was because we hope to contribute to the efforts of the police to rid itself from dishonest policemen and women, and to strive towards becoming a service that we can be proud of and can depend on to serve and protect all of us who live and work here, and also those who visit us. And please don't ask me about diplomatic immunities. So I think why we said specifically to contribute to the efforts of the police is that we know that the police are as concerned as we are with the high levels of corruption amongst many of their members. And the fact that we have Brigadier Wasserman here is proof of this. He was appointed in November last year to set up the Integrity Unit and given the responsibility to establish the structures and work at fighting corruption. And he immediately agreed when I approached him to come and speak at the seminar, and he also, Gareth and I had a meeting with the acting national commissioner, and when I asked him if we had his permission, he immediately said yes. So there is concern within the police service. There is also a commitment towards working at rooting out corruption. So some of the criticism that you may hear from us, I think the police share with us. So I will be just briefly touching on the history of the SAPS Anti-Corruption Unit. I will look at some of the investigations that were carried out during the existence of the Anti-Corruption Unit and also where we stood at least last year when the police's annual report was released. And then I will refer to some of the publications on police corruption from the ISS, and I will hand over then to Steph to continue with the rest of our presentation. Now, if you look at the Anti-Corruption Unit, we have to go on a step back to the establishment of the South African Police Service in 1995. As most of you will probably know, the police service was established as a result of the amalgamation process. 11 police agencies that existed in South Africa at the time, the South African Police, the largest of all of those, and then the police forces of the old police, the various states in South Africa. And those then formed the South African Police Service in 1995. And a year later, the SAPS created the Anti-Corruption Unit. And just to go back one step, before that, there was a number of what was referred to as docket units. And they were responsible in various forms in all of these 11 police agencies to investigate police corruption. So all of that was then used to establish the new Anti-Corruption Unit, and Steph will be able to tell you much more about those processes. But I asked him to focus especially his attention on what is needed for a new Anti-Corruption Unit in today's situation, today's police agency, and the situation that we have. And he's probably the best placed person to talk about those issues. Now, when the Anti-Corruption Unit was formed, it was, of course, originally established within the detective service, which made a lot of sense at the time. That is where your investigative capacities were placed. And then for some reason, it was shortly afterwards removed to management services. And then when Jackie Selebe was appointed national head of the police, National Commissioner of the Police in 2000, January 2000, he moved the Anti-Corruption Unit back to the detective service, which we all thought was a great decision, because we thought that he understood the need for this investigative capacity to be placed where you have all your other investigators placed, and that was the detective service. But then 2 years later, he started with he started breaking down the pillars of this unit, and it was not just negative for the members of this unit, but it also had a huge impact on their effectiveness in terms of fighting corruption. In 1 year, he closed down 6 of the 9 provincial units. And as if that was not enough, the next year he closed down what remained of the Anti-Corruption Unit. And the problem with that was not only did we lose the capacity to deal with corruption within the police service in a centralized way, but it also created a dispersal of this responsibility. So suddenly the responsibility for fighting police corruption was all over the place. Some of the responsibilities was handed over to the Organized Crime Unit, and the Organized Crime Unit actually became a dumping ground for almost everything as the specialized units of the police started disappearing. And it became an impossible thing for the organized crime unit in any case to deal with all of this. But the idea was where you have corruption that can be linked to organized crime, it should be handled by the organized crime unit, which to some extent made sense. And then all other corruption became the responsibility of police stations, which is the last place where you want to investigate police corruption, for all the reasons that I think Steph will give some attention to in terms of the recommendations that we arrived at. Then, of course, the Hawks was established a few years later in 2009, and some responsibility for dealing with police corruption was given to the Hawks, but it was a limited responsibility in the sense that the Hawks investigated corruption committed within the Hawks, in other words, by members of the Hawks, all ranks. And then corruption within the broader police service, that's only where there was a colonel or a higher ranking officer involved. All other corruption matters remained with police stations. And then came along the IPID, the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, that was established. Well, it replaced actually the old Independent Complaints Directorate, but with a new mandate in April 2012, and they also received a limited responsibility for dealing with police corruption, such as, for example, when police corruption was reported by the public directly to IPID, or where the executive director of IPID initiated investigation, or when a request was received from the Minister of Police or from a MEC, or even from the Police Secretariat. So it's in a way a limited mandate in terms of police corruption, but I'm certain Mr. Sissoko will speak to this issue a little later. Then, of course, there were all kinds of integrity management units all over the place, the internal audit component, and then within management interventions, which is also a new capacity within the police service established last year. They have an analysis center and service complaints. So within service complaints, also a very limited capacity to deal with corruption complaints, but then, of course, they would refer it to a relevant structure to investigate this. The problem with the integrity management unit's internal audit component, and I'm not reflecting on Brigadier Wasserman's his component, but the main responsibility was to detect corruption, not to investigate corruption. So the investigation still had to be referred to some other body to attend to that. Then I think what is important is to look at what transpired over the next few years, since 2000 to last year, 2016. By 2000, in the year that Jackie Selebe was appointed National Commissioner of the Police, the Anti-Corruption Unit investigated approximately 4,000 cases every year. And the police, in terms of its functional members, numbered about 100,000. I hope you can see it there. You should be able to see it there. So about 100,000 members in the police service and 4,000 investigations, so working at full capacity. But by 2016, in terms of the police's own annual reports, the number of corruption investigations was reduced to just over 1,000. So that is about 75,000 corruption investigations, less than we had in 2000. And it does raise huge question marks. How is it possible that a police service that expanded its number from 2000 to 2016 by about 50, just over 50%, So you had 52,000 more police officers in 2016 than we had in 2000, but now you had a drop of 75,000%. It doesn't make sense, and I think it didn't make sense to the police themselves, and this is why they decided to establish the office now handled by Brigadier Wasserman, and I think hopefully as time goes on and he has had the opportunity to properly dig into this, we will see a change here. The idea is also to have, of course, a central office where we can get reliable information about what is happening within the police service in terms of all of these investigations. Now, if we look at IPID's annual reports, we can clearly see the effects of a limited capacity. They received only 112 cases of police corruption, which they dealt with, and then 11 cases of systemic corruption. And systemic corruption, of course, a little more complex, but Mr. Sissoko may reflect on what systemic corruption is. Then if we compare what the Victims of Crime Survey found in their 2015-2016 report, then again it raises question marks. We all know that corruption is a problem, and especially within the police service, which means that there is clearly something wrong in terms of the police's ability to detect and investigate organized crime, corruption cases within the police service. According to the Victims of Crime Survey, 77% of households indicated that corruption amongst government officials increased over the last 3 years, and the results also show that the three groups within the government entities most likely to be involved in corruption are those services involved in employment, social grants, and then the police. So the police find themselves in the top three. So clearly this raises huge question marks about the reliability of the figures that we see in the 2015-16. It may be correct, but then it does not reflect the levels of corruption that we have in the police. Then finally, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to refer to you on my next slide to the publications that you see. The bottom two there, the last one reflects on the policy brief itself, which is what Steph Grobler and I worked on. It's available online, but there are some copies also outside in the shelf. And just above that, the ISS paper that I published in 2015 about the police's specialized units, which includes the Anti-Corruption Unit, but a number of other specialized investigative units in the police service that was destroyed by Jackie Selebi over the years, but especially in 2006. And the police are still struggling to re-establish some of those units, realizing that they are necessary. And on top, the three monographs you see there, you're of course welcome to a copy of this presentation if you want. You don't need to write all of that down. But those monographs also reflect on police corruption. So a lot has been written by us and by others, and hopefully with the initiatives now, especially within the police service, and some initiatives within IPID that Mr. Sissoko will reflect on, shows that there's a new urgency to deal with police corruption. That is all from my side. I would love now to hand over to my co-writer, Steph Grobler. Steph, now there we go. Okay. There we go. Thanks. Do you want this? Okay. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Johan, thank you very much. And Gareth, thank you very much for the kind introduction. And a particular word of welcome to Brigadier Wasserman, whom I am very, very pleased to meet. And I've known him for some years. And as you all know, old age is one of the terrible things that happens to a person I bumped into a former colleague of mine, Willie van der Schuyf, who sits at the back there, and I hardly recognized him. Willie, for that I apologize, but as I said, old age is one of the terrible things that happens to you. At least I recognize myself when I shave in the morning. Ladies and gentlemen, corruption. Yes, corruption in the South African Police Service has always been a problem. And one of the great issues that we had within the South African Police Service, and particularly relating to corruption investigations, was the fact that an investigation into corruption differs dramatically from any other investigation that you do. And the reason for that is, let me just carry on with this. There we are. Because corruption is difficult in its nature for the simple reason that the corruptor and the corruptee are equally guilty. So now you sit with the situation, who is your witness, who is your accused? You have to make some kind of decision there. The other problem, of course, is that witnesses are hard to come by. Witnesses feel that when they become involved, they're stigmatized, which they are, unfortunately. And in many instances, they very conveniently either forget or they don't want to become involved. That's an unfortunate situation in most criminal cases where a person tells you, I don't want to become involved, which is a grave pity. Of course, the other thing is the fact that both parties may fall victim to extortion. The corruptor by the corruptee or vice versa, or by a third party who becomes aware of what has been going on. And as you well know, when you start blackmailing people, it's very effective. Blackmail is one of the most effective tools that we found that act against witnesses and police personnel also, particularly when it comes to saying to a person, oh, you've got a nice house, or you've got nice children. It would be a pity if something happened to them. Now, as far as investigations are concerned, and the necessity for a single body to investigate, it is unfortunate that all investigations or investigations in the past relating to corruption have been done by various units and organizations, and this led, unfortunately, to fragmentation. It should be dealt with by a single body, a single oversight body that has control over training, has control over men and material, it has control over the flow of information, etc., data, etc. Now, one should always take into consideration that when a single body that investigates corruption is formed, that it deals with all forms of offences, both criminal and disciplinary. That's very difficult because you get the less serious and you get the more serious. One thing that we found in the past is that there is some kind of notion that a useless policeman is corrupt. That is not true. A useless policeman is useless. He can't do his job properly. In many cases, a good policeman may be subject to corruption. Why? Because that is the person that's being targeted to do either or not to do. So one sits with the problem that fragmentation, particularly in investigations, when one unit does this investigation and another unit does a different investigation, that fragmentation unfortunately leads to a loss of information sharing, which is very important. The flow of information and the sharing of information, albeit on a need-to-know basis, is very, very important. As a matter of fact, ladies and gentlemen, it's vital to the success of the investigation. You cannot do an investigation without having some kind of control over the intelligence that you generate. And there, please make a distinction between information and intelligence, because intelligence is something that has information that's been verified. Dealing with integrity, allow me just to tell you that I'm very pleased to have Brigadier Wasserman here and to learn that there is an integrity unit that's being set up. But integrity, ladies and gentlemen, is a personal trait. You are either inherently honest or you are inherently dishonest. And between these two poles, there is a gray area. Either you've got the very honest, and that leads either to the very honest or the very dishonest. An integrity unit should screen staff. It can become involved in investigations, but only integrity investigations, not the criminal type. Why? Because I'd like to see them divorced from the actual investigation, because you may find yourself in a situation where you are tainted by somebody saying, yes, but you don't like that person. I beg your pardon. You don't like that person. That's why you gave him a poor rating, security rating. One of the other things that is very important is this integrity unit should undertake regular and irregular integrity tests, lifestyle audits, and tests for alcohol and narcotic dependence. Why is that important? Because these are things that if a person is addicted to narcotics, that's one of the issues that may lead to this person either selling information or destroying information or compromising an investigation just for the sake of getting money. So that's very important. And we also feel and have felt, and we did that in the past, psychological tests, psychological evaluation. Very, very important. Why is that important? For the simple reason that you need to have the right person to do the right job with the right people at the right time. In the past, investigations that were done in group forms, for instance, where you have an undercover operation that's being dealt with off-site, you have to set up a dedicated task team, and you have to be very careful in getting the right people to interact, because they're there, they're off-site. You don't want them to interact with other police officials who might know them. And I can tell you some horror stories of investigations that we've had to stop and abandon because some of the investigators were recognized by people at station level. So, yes, it's very important that you have the right people. They become frustrated. You don't have direct control over them. So that frustration might lead to interpersonal discrepancies, problems that they have, aggression, etc., etc. And the most important thing there is fitness for a task. Something that we dealt with just now is the single dedicated unit. And it does all the investigations. Of course, you've got to observe protocol. One of the issues of protocol in the South African Police Service, and I would imagine in other departments also, is one of seniority. Do you have, or is it okay for a constable to investigate a colonel? Or is it okay for a warrant officer to investigate a general? This is a problem. As long as you have somebody in command or in charge of the investigation, and you have lesser ranks that you can dedicate and delegate jobs to, that's fine. But the most important thing is that protocol always needs to be observed, particularly in a semi-military organization like the police. They like to say that they've now civilianized, but they haven't. You still need a rank structure, but be that something else. Investigating police corruption at station level, ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you is a recipe, I beg your pardon, is a recipe for disaster. It cannot work, it has not worked, it will never work. Why? For the simple reason that people group together in a single unit, work together. There is no way that you can really, shall I use the word, guard against your information being damaged, your investigation being compromised. When you get a witness to come and see you, the other people in the police station recognize that person, see who it is, and then it makes it very easy for that witness to be intimidated. You need a police investigative unit like that, anti-corruption unit, to be off-site. It cannot ever be either in the same office building or in the same environment or in the same compound as the other police agency or, units. That is something, and you know, we have always been very, very strong on the point that security of staff, security of our records, security of communication, intelligence, IT, access control. You've got to guard your people. You've got to safeguard your staff. You've got to make sure that the vehicles they drive are not identifiable or easily identifiable as police vehicles. So there's a very great difference there in the approach that the police have. In the past, they said, no, you must use police vehicles registered in the name of the police. Also a problem, because if you get the registration number, it's easy to trace the number. Why? Because you've got the authority to do that. You've got the rank behind you, and you can go to the licensing department and say, to whom is this vehicle being registered? And they will tell you it's a police vehicle. Then you go to logistics and you ask them, which unit has got this vehicle? And they'll tell you, Anti-Corruption Unit. Then you know there's a problem. So you see the difference or the sensitivity around this. It's a total mindset. It's a different idea. Dealing with crucial or critical success factors, I think staff selection integrity is number one. You cannot ever have somebody working for you if you are not sure of that person's integrity. And a word of advice to Brigadier Wasserman, and I'm sure he knows what I'm talking about, is selecting the right people. Selecting the right people is making sure that you do your recruiting yourself. Don't allow people to be dumped on your unit. That can happen. It has happened in the past. You get somebody who is transferred to you, and that person becomes a problem because that person is an internal spy. You don't know that person's integrity. You haven't interviewed that person yourself. You don't know who that person is, where the person comes from. So that's vital, absolutely vital. I've spoken to you about the single dedicated investigative capacity. There's nothing more to be said about that. You have to have independence from institutional command, control, and oversight. That means that if you are positioning your anti-corruption in a unit, don't put it within detective service like they have. Don't place it within management services like they did. Don't place it within commercial crime. Why not? Because these people have a particular level that they have, a reporting line that they've got to report. And that line of reporting goes up to a point. You need the shortest possible line of command. Unit to the commissioner. That's it. For the simple reason that if you have a filtration process in place, the commissioner, the person who's going to make a decision one way or the other, will never get the true facts. It is unfortunate that Jackie Salibi was never interested in that. And on many occasions in my career, I was chased out of his office because I dared to make certain comments and tried to make certain suggestions to him. A very important thing, and I'm very glad that there is a gentleman from the investigative, the IPID here, is there should be a reciprocal agreement with IPID to do who's going to investigate who. Guard the guards. We'll talk about that just now. Because any investigation, you'll find that, and we did find that. How do you get somebody to stop an investigation against you? You make an allegation against them for some kind of impropriety, or fraud, or theft, or corruption, or whatever. Why? Because you want to neutralize the person who's doing the investigation. And if something like that happens, ladies and gentlemen, you need a dedicated department like IPID to do that investigation for you. And likewise, as far as IPID is concerned, if they have the same problem, who do they turn to? Who guards the guard? They have to find somebody who will do that independently. One of the other critical success factors is to co-opt expertise. You must be able to co-opt expertise internally and externally. Unfortunately, provincial commissioners have in the past been very, very jealous of their staff. They do not like co-opting staff to an anti-corruption unit. Of course it's a problem, because that provincial commissioner might call the person in after hours and say, "What are you busy with?" And that guy's got no answer. He's got to answer. Otherwise, where is his job going to go to? You see, this is so subtle. It's a subtle question, it's a subtle process. If you co-opt people internally and externally, not only from the South African Police Service, but from other government departments, there are various government departments that have their own investigative capacity. You should have some kind of agreement with them, whereas they can assist you on a mutual investigative basis. And the last one on this particular issue, and don't misunderstand the use of the word quick and effective neutralization of suspects. Doesn't mean go out and shoot him. It means getting that person out of harm's way. Why? Because they can very easily abuse their position by finding out what normal would not be possible. In other words, place the person on suspension. Make sure that that person does not have personal access to any of the information systems in the South African Police Service. How are you going to do that? I'm not quite sure. But I'm sure that better people than me will be able to figure that one out. Like not blackmailing, I beg your pardon, blacklisting the person's staff number so that he's not able to access the police information systems. And then, of course, what's important there is to deal with these things very quickly, effectively, and efficiently. If a person is being accused and there is sufficient evidence against that person, then that person should be tried as quickly as possible. Forget about years and years, the case being remanded. Get this thing done with, both departmentally and criminally if necessary. But get the thing over and done with, so that if you have this problem, that if you don't deal with this effectively and efficiently and quickly, you have a problem where they say there has not been a breakdown in trust between you and the employer. And if you go to the labor court, that person will be back in office. And that's exactly what you don't want. As far as the unique approach to investigations are concerned, we found that you have a designated task team, you have a team leader, and you get with these people, with this independent task team, has co-opted and appointed people, the right people for the investigations. If you're doing an investigation relating to motor vehicle theft, you need people doing that investigation who are adept and experienced in that kind of investigation. You need an independent budget and logistics. I spoke to you about motor vehicles. I spoke to you about safe houses, to rent a safe house. These things are expensive. You've got to make sure that if you go off-site, that there is no intervention by logistics, or what do they call the department, the section within the South African Police that makes supply chain management. Thank you, Brigadier. You see, I've been out of the service too long. I forget the new names. Supply chain management. They are the people who deal with procurement. And I'm not saying that you should sidestep the procurement process. What I am saying is that if you do that, it should be on a very, very strict need-to-know basis. Thirdly, there must be very, very close liaison with the Hawks, with crime intelligence, with the Special Investigating Unit, and the National Prosecuting Authority. And why is that? In your dedicated task team, you've got to have somebody who can liaise with the department that is being represented. The South African Police Service and the Special Investigating Unit had an anti-corruption task team which worked beautifully with the National Prosecuting Authority to have a prosecutor dedicated to your investigation. If some problem arises, like somebody makes an urgent application against you in the High Court, there is somebody immediately available to argue the case in court. You don't have to brief somebody. That person is with you. He lives the investigation with you, can tell you what you need, can give you pointers on what is admissible as evidence and what not. Then, of course, a very clear and enforceable mandate. The reason why that is important is it must come from the top. It must bind all the units and sections and officers in the South African Police Service, so that if the mandate says that you are able to do this or allowed to do that, there is a mandate to cover that. Many years ago, we did an investigation in Limpopo, and there was an MEC, I forget his name, which is probably a good thing, otherwise I would have mentioned it, whom I thought was probably one of the biggest idiots that I'd ever come across in my life. Because he said to me that you don't have the authority to investigate corruption in Limpopo province. Now, I'm quite sure that he didn't know what the law said. The law doesn't say that you can investigate this here or there or wherever. Be that as it may, your database and your IT needs to be secure. You must protect it against all kinds of attacks, either internally or externally. Even people who work for you internally may be subjected to some kind of blackmail. In other words, I know what you did last week or last year or so and so and so. It would be a pity if somebody found that out, Don't you think how about getting me this information? Corruption and everything that goes with it is a dastardly affair. Then, of course, success factors. How do you deal with this? One of the most important things that I've always found is the covert capacity. You have to have a capacity where you can do things without other people knowing about it. It is unfortunate that you do need sometimes, and this is a very, very important thing, that if you do intercept a telephone conversation, you do it legally. Never, ever, as long as you live, do something illegally, because it will come back and it will bite you. You will lose your case, and you will have wasted a lot of time and energy and money. So covertly, you must deal with it strictly according to the law. There are laws in place that determine exactly how this is done, and that's one of the reasons why you should have a very good liaison with the National Prosecuting Authority, because they've got the people that know how to deal with this. As far as the anti-corruption strategy is concerned, I can only say to you, ladies and gentlemen, that I wholeheartedly subscribe to that. I agree with that. I think it's fantastic that the ACS should have, as its number one, it should have prevention. Because what's the point? if your prevention has failed, you sit with a reactive situation where you've got to investigate it. So you've got to prevent it, number one. And there you need various strategies. We can talk about that forever, but just this is, I think, sufficient at this point. Then, of course, you've got to detect it. You've got to find out. Yeah, this is corrupt. And how do you detect that? People come along and they give you this information. And then you must investigate. That's important because you've got to determine whether there is somebody guilty or not. And then, of course, resolution, which is the final resolution in court or in a departmental disciplinary action or whatever the situation may be. But the ACS, can only be practical if it's supported by top management across the country. Each and every senior manager must subscribe to this and agree to this. And if it's necessary, it should be written into his job contract. That's another thing that's important, is a job contract, clear, enforceable. So that if a person transgresses, you can say, you've acted contrary to your job description and your contract. And please, don't ever forget the importance of unions in this particular aspect also. Unions play a vital role. The top security clearance for all members is important because all commanders should have a top security clearance. I said to somebody the other day that I have seen in my career many times when you sit and you interview somebody, you have a document in front of you and the document is titled top secret or confidential even. You can see the person on the other side of the table trying to read upside down, trying to twist their heads around to see what's been written down there. And we had that kind of a problem with senior managers also, who at one stage wanted me to provide a list of all people being investigated, and I refused, point blank, because I could not be satisfied as to what was going to happen to that information. I asked the person who asked me for that, I said, what are you going to do with it? He said, I'm going to file it. I said, who is going to file it? No, my secretary is going to file it. So you see, their security just breaks down. You give it to a person who's not security cleared, that information or that report is placed in a file and everybody's got access to it. It just doesn't work. That's why I say you have to safeguard these things. You've got to make sure that the person who gets information is entitled to it and on a need-to-know basis. Integrity tests, randomly done. At the Special Investigating Unit where I served for about 9 years after retiring from SAPS, one of the things that they did was an alcohol test. They come to you and say, we're going to the doctor. Why? Because they're going to do a urine test. Wow. Oh, to do what? No, just to determine, any blood alcohol or that kind of thing in you. I've already spoken to you about that. Important. I can tell you many stories of random integrity tests where a suitcase full of narcotics is placed and a guy finds it, and then you know exactly what was in it, and then see what's been handed in. Who handled it? What was handed in? Was something removed? Was something taken? Money, narcotics, drugs, anything like that. You don't know. That's integrity. Many people frown on that. But if a person who works for you knows that he's liable to be subjected to a random integrity test, they might be a bit careful. Then, of course, all training interventions in the South African Police Service, all training, should include corruption awareness. People should know what corruption is all about. The corruption legislation is very good. It's a good legislation. You've got to make sure that the people who work for you know the legislation. I have found in the past, you ask somebody, is there a difference between a corruptor and a corruptee? And the guy will say, well, yes, of course, the guy who does the corruption, he's guilty, but the guy who accepted the corruption is not guilty. The law says both, and there are particular sections that deal with that. So it's necessary that everybody dealing with corruption knows the law. And there must be national liaison with state departments. I spoke to you about that a bit earlier on in the criminal justice system. and information and cooperation on a need-to-know basis. You have to consult, you have to share your information, and it's only if you do that and you have a mutual understanding and there's respect for you that they will deal with you correctly. Now, just before I close, international cooperation, example, Interpol and Transparency International is very important. You have to know what's going on outside the borders of your country. You have to attend seminars on international best practices. You've got to know how they investigate. What do they do? How do they prevent it? How do they deal with these? There's a university in Toronto, in Ottawa. They've got the behavioral risk assessment strategy, which says that you can identify people who are subject to corruption. And you can, by training interventions, you can train them and you can get rid of corruption in that way. And then, of course, the legitimacy issue. Liaison with the press. Don't be a glory hunter. Glory hunters have fallen very hard. Deal with the press professionally. If you're able to give them information, then do so, but have somebody there who deals with it. To close, I'd just like to end off with the issue of who guards the guards, the so-called quis custodiet ipsos custodes. Who guards the guards? Who is above the law? According to newspaper reports that I've read in the week, the Venezuelan Attorney General Luisa Ortega was dismissed because there was allegations that her husband was guilty of blackmail and extortion. But she was a fighter against corruption in the public service. And that was one good way, one effective way to neutralize her, was they didn't have anything against her, so they found something against her husband. Then, of course, locally here, we've got our own Dr. Makosi Koza. We've got Mr. Derek Hanekom. All people who have voted according to their conscience and are now being headhunted in a negative way. She's already been axed from a position. Mr. Hanekom has got 10 days in which to say why they're not going to get rid of him. Then, of course, we're looking at Grace Mugabe, and we're looking at Omar al-Bashir, not to speak of the Guptas, who've all done things that we all believe to be illegal. If you take just the Guptas, for instance, flying into Waterkloof Air Base, who got disciplined, who got fired? The people from the South African Air Force. They got disciplined. Omar al-Bashir, what happened to him? International warrant of arrest issued for him. He was allowed to leave the country. Grace Mugabe, guilty of assault, ostensibly according to reports. What happened to her? She gets diplomatic immunity. You see, that's the question. Who is above the law? And I can tell you now, ladies and gentlemen, nobody is against the law. And while I'm saying that, the final word that I have comes from Edmund Burke, who was born on the 12th of January, 1729. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Thank you very much. Thanks, Gareth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steph, for sharing your practical insights into what it is like to head South Africa's first national anti-corruption unit with the South African Police Service. And as you can see, it's very practical stuff. You can have a lot of policies and a lot of speeches and say a lot of things, but until you have a unit that is properly resourced and is dedicated to fighting corruption, its men and women are people of integrity and have the necessary resources and management support, it's not going to lead to very much. But we know that there are a lot of people in the South African Police Service who do take corruption very seriously and want to deal with this issue that is undermining the public trust in the organization. And we're very fortunate today to have somebody here from the South African Police Service, Brigadier Wasserman, Section Head of the Integrity Management Service. And we're very fortunate that you're here today, Brigadier, to just tell us a bit about the current initiatives that you're involved in to try and ensure that, that integrity reigns in the South African Police Service. I'll hand over the podium to you.
Thanks so much. Let me just get my water here. Morning, everybody. Like you've heard, I'm Brigadier Wasserman. It's an absolute privilege for me to be here, to actually share the podium with two of my previous mentors that I've known for many years when I served in the Priority Investigations Unit, still as a Lieutenant Colonel as well. I worked with both of the Johan Burger, who's a former police general, as you know, and then Brigadier Steph. I hold you both in high regard, so it's really a privilege for me to be here and to give you some insight into the initiatives by the South African Police Service currently. I think we are generally in agreement that corruption is unacceptable, or the levels of corruption are unacceptable. And we need to do something about that. And I can assure you that the current police management, senior management, are seriously committed to really address this issue. Hence the establishment of the Integrity Unit and the enhancement of capacities within the anti-corruption sphere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some background, an introduction, deal somewhat with the current capacity until now. Just excuse me. Got somewhat of a flu. And then deal with the strategy that we're going to deal with, like was alluded to by Brigadier Steph as well. And then the initiatives to enhance the capacity, that I'm going to focus much more on. And then the way forward on how we need to deal with this going forward. So I think we in general agreement that there's no place for corruption anymore, that those corrupt officials in the SAPS must leave the SAPS with capable speed. That is a given, and we have a commitment towards that. But to deal with this issue in an effective manner, we need to speak to the psyche of our police officials and change the ethical culture within the SAPS as a broader strategy, not only focusing, like we've done until now, more in a reactive capacity, where you have an investigative capacity in SAPS dealing with corruption. If a person is under investigation for corruption, it means we've lost the plot already. So Brigadier Steph also referred to that principle that some people are inherently corrupt and others are not. That principle, as you would know, is referred to as the 20-60-20 principle, which would have it that 20% people in the world, or sitting here, or in the police service, could be inherently unethical or prone to corruption. You will never change such a person. That person don't need any pressures to be unethical. They will be unethical. Then, fortunately, you've got the other side of the coin, which is 20% people that will act ethically, that won't never get involved in corruption, regardless of the pressures that's exerted on them or in their personal circumstances. So what are we saying when we're saying we're focusing on changing the psyche of our police officials? We are talking about the 60%. So you will have the 60% that will lean to one or other side of the 20%, isn't it? If they've got a strict commander or a manager or a supervisor, they would not submit false claims because they know this person is meticulous, but then they get a lackadaisical or a laissez-faire type of commander, and then they would start taking chances. They would increase their vehicle claims, the kilometers that they claim, and they would be committing fraud, false S&T claims or whatever, or they would be starting to taking bribes. If we're talking ethics, isn't it, we are referring as SAPS, the current strategy, back to basics, that the person with ethics is actually back to basics, isn't it? Because a person that's ethical will get to work on time. A person that's ethical won't commit corruption or fraud. So that is what we need to do. If we address that, we address the back to basics approach simultaneously. So there's focused initiatives needed to change the ethical culture within the SAPS, the mindset of our officials, so that if a person lands in an ethical predicament or an ethical dilemma where he needs to decide whether to now lean towards the side of the corrupt officials and or corruptees and corruptors, like you said, be one of those parties, that he makes the right ethical decision. So there's a serious joint effort in government, a combined effort. Hence the new regulations, which I will refer to as well, the public service regulations. So we are one of the team players in government that must address these issues and change the ethical culture, not only in the SAPS, of which we are one of the main role players in society and in government that need to deal with this, but broadly in government. So emphasis is therefore on capacity building on all those 4 pillars. I'll show you the model just now that Brigadier Steph also referred to in terms of the strategy, which is prevention, detection, investigation, and resolution, and then the current investigative capacity that must be enhanced, because there's currently an investigative capacity specifically dealing with anti-corruption in the detective services and within the DPCI, within the Hawks. And they will, as I will later refer to in my presentation, they deal with certain specific issues. And there's a process flow of how we will deal jointly as a team with corruption. So just to refer to the Integrity Management Service. The Integrity Management Service will now play the role of the ethics officers within the South African Police Service and is in line with the new public service regulation, which compels all departments to have a designated capacity of ethics officers. So we will be the custodians of the anti-corruption strategy in the police, with various other role players fitting into this strategy to broadly address corruption. So again, the 4 pillars referred to at the top, those of you that are familiar with the King reports, the King reports, the first 2 dealt with corporate governance. The 2 latest King reports deal specifically with ethics. It even compels, as you know, in terms of the new Companies Act, private companies in the private sector to also now have ethics committees and ethics officers appointed, designated to change the ethical culture within the organization, deal with compliance, deal with issues of dishonesty and unethical behavior. Similarly with us, we keep to those principles. The public service regulation, specifically Chapter 2, that's brought about various changes in government and compel officials, for instance, to do financial disclosures, the analysis of those disclosures, lifestyle audits, those type of things that was referred to in the previous presentation as well. Our strategic plan as SAPS, that's aligned. This is where our mandate is vested in all these prescripts. SAPS national instructions, a designated national instruction that will deal with ethics and integrity management. That wasn't in existence until now, that I'm working on, and that I will hopefully within the next 2 or 3 months will have a draft available so that it can be dealt with by senior management. Then the Public Administration Management Act. The Act has been signed off by the President but not implemented yet, hence the public service regulations that gives effects to these type of issues. So what is important about PAMA is that it now criminalizes doing business with government. So government officials cannot do business with government. They should have withdrawn from such interest by February this year, or the regulation indicate that they must then resign from public service if they intend going on doing business with government. So they won't be allowed, and there is even a prison sentence involved of 5 years if they fail to adhere to these prescripts. National Development Plan is the Bible of government currently, and that is no different related to ethics or integrity. Hence, we use that as one of the prescripts as well. The Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, the other legislation, the Public Service Act that allows for remunerative work to be done. I'll be dealing with that a little bit later. And then the monitoring, the impact, where government now keeps departments responsible in terms of ethics and corruption and to deal with these matters. So that broadly is the strategy that Brigadier Grobler also referred to earlier. As you can see, it's based on 4 pillars, of which the green one at the top you would see is prevention, which deals with the ethical culture that I referred to earlier. Changing the ethical culture, training and awareness. Now you will see these 4 pillars, prevention, detection, investigation, fits into each other or feeds into each other. The reason being that it is senseless that we investigate a person, for instance, who generated false S&T claims on our financial systems, but we do not close those gaps later. So if we need to do an analysis, we need to look at the processes, close the gaps that this person exploited to commit corruption in terms of those processes. Or if the lack of a policy or the absence of a policy contributed to this situation, we need to then implement policy or management action. So at the top, it speaks to those issues that Brigadier Steph already spoke to, and that is one of our priorities. Policies and procedures that must address these issues. Employee vetting, that's one of your most important issues, and that is employee suitability, exactly as referred to. So we need to do integrity testing. We need to have psychometric testing that has got certain batteries that deal specifically when selecting personnel with people of high integrity. And there is models available, and we are working currently with our employee health and wellness as psychologists to then enhance the current recruitment system in terms of the psychometric testing. Risk management, very important. It's obvious that you must know the risks in your organization, otherwise how are you going to mitigate those risks? The corruption database I'll refer to a little bit later, very important. It is to blacklist so-called officials where you have seen a situation where a person is investigated within the police service or another government department, they then resign. And the next moment you see that person is now even higher ranking in a different department. He left here as a director and he's now a chief director or a DDG in another department. Those officials must be leaving the public service. We don't need such officials. Internal audit, you're all familiar with, that's part of your action. Management action, the steps that is taken to address these issues. And management buy-in, the blessing of management and management involvement in these issues. And I'll be dealing with the ethics committee a little bit later and linking that up with those risks that were highlighted by Brigadier Steph. Whistleblowing, one of my assignments is that we will set up a designated whistleblowing hotline within the SAPS. There is already various hotlines that deals with complaints against the police service, delivery complaints, Crime Stop and those type of things where you can report crime, but I think it's important that we have a designated hotline that deals with ethics, not only anti-corruption so much, because there is an anti-corruption hotline within the Public Service Commission, but deals with broader ethical issues, because sometimes officials want to bring something to your attention related to ethical breaches, and they do not have a platform to do so anonymously if it hasn't been created for them. Investigation will be an internal capacity which will deal with anti-corruption, but in our perspective, specifically with conflicts of interest investigations. I'll show you that just now when we get to that part. And then cooperation with other agencies. It's no use that we work in silos. We need to take the hands of IPID and the National Prosecuting Authority, the Financial Intelligence Center, the Public Protector, all those institutions that deals with these issues to have a joint effort, which will be done through, amongst others, the Anti-Corruption Task Team, like it's been done in the past. Then on the left-hand side is the orange is the disciplinary action. That's the consequence management. What I want to highlight here is civil recovery. Now, civil recovery is known in the public service mostly as loss management, but it goes a step further now. Under the Public Finance Management Act, we can actually recover money from officials doing business with government, because it's not allowed. And we have done so successfully in government on a couple of occasions, and it hasn't been successfully challenged. So that monies were recovered. Criminal prosecution and then referral to other agencies as well as part of your consequence management. This is just the implementation. Couple of important things. I'm not going to go into depth into that model that you see. It is important that you have capacity. It's obvious that in an organization with 194,000 officials, that we need the necessary capacity to deal with this. If you look at a situation in the UK, for instance, at New Scotland Yard, New Scotland Yard has got an integrity capacity of about 700 members. That's how seriously they take it, and they also do these soft sting operations that Brigadier Steph were referring to, where they would leave trucks and those type of things and see and test people's integrity to see whether they hand in this exhibits and those type of things. So effective strategies, as the top block there, we need to have effective strategies and policies in place, and that is what we're busy drafting in to enhance what is currently in place in the police service already, and then the programs and procedures which will cover those 4 pillars that I referred to earlier: prevention, detection, investigation, and resolution. And that will then, I suppose, to change the ethical culture within the organization. So I'm going to refer now to the specific priorities, and our unit is structured likewise, dealing with ethics management, having a designated detection capacity, and then having an investigative capacity, which is situated in detectives, DPCI, and in my own office, but that will be working as a joint team together. So, appointment of designated ethics officers. It's senseless that I come here and that I would want to propagate ethics, but I'm clueless about ethics, and that is a problem. So, it's important for me that a certain standard is kept. Myself, I'm a certified ethics officer with the Ethics Institute, and in terms of investigation, a certified fraud examiner with the Association for Certified Fraud Examiners. That is the specific standard we want to keep in the SAPS in a unit like this. The Hawks are going the same route. I think IPID is going the same route with their investigators, to have them certified as fraud examiners, as to professionalize that specific occupational category. The Department of Public Service and Administration is also in a process of having a specific occupational category for ethics officers, to which they must keep to a certain standard, and they must have certain credentials to be in there. I've got my second in command here this morning, Colonel Trevor Royce as well, who's the head of our investigations. He comes from DPCI, coincidentally, and they were going that same route, the Hawks, to have a certain level of professionalism in terms of their investigators. So we're going that route. Ethics and integrity, conflict of interest in an ethics committee. Now, what is the importance of an ethics committee? We referred earlier to where this unit should be placed. It is very important that a unit like this should be placed in the office, in a department, in the office of a DG, in the case of the South African Police Service, in the office of the National Commissioner. But that also has got certain pitfalls, because you are later then accused of being a tool in the hands of certain individuals, or an individual. So to circumvent that, the regulation, the public service regulation, provides for the establishment of ethics committees. Now, an ethics committee must be a very high-level committee. You can have it in your provinces as well, in terms of the police, in your provincial commissioner offices, but there must be one ethics committee. Now, that ethics committee, in terms of the regulation, must be headed by a Deputy Director General, a DDG, or in the case of the South African Police Service, at least at the level of Lieutenant General. Must be the chairperson. But it then must constitute of provincial commissioners, some provincial commissioners, let's say 2 provincial commissioners, 2 divisional commissioners, some regional commissioners, the internal audit function, the integrity management function. Why do we have that? It brings about transparency. Where you have contentious issues to deal with, it can then be dealt with by the ethics committee. So you don't have one individual that make a call on a specific case. They also the custodians of all these policies that must deal with ethics. So where it allows your head of department, where there's a contentious ethical issue to deal with, to consult his legal services, to consult an ethics committee, to consult his management, and then make an informed decision, which brings about transparency. The terms of reference for this has already been drafted in the SAPS and is, as we speak, being dealt with by the National Management Forum. Our unit will then ideally report into such a structure, into the ethics committee. That will be our reporting lines, and directly to the National Commissioner. So, conduct ethics and anti-corruption risk assessments. That's what we need to conduct. Ethics surveys. It's important that you know the climate in your organization, that we know where our risk lies within every division and province. The SAPS is a mammoth organization, so it's clear that our risks, for instance, in Eastern Cape would differ from those in Gauteng or Northern Limpopo province or KwaZulu-Natal, and that's why we need to keep a fraud and corruption risk register, of which we will be the custodians, and mitigation plan. So what is important, that every year we must be in a position to give an integrity health status report to the National Commissioner. And at one glance, give the National Commissioner and top management a view of what's going on in SAPS. In terms of corruption, the trends in terms of corruption, the surveys that was done, the perceptions of our people, and the specific risks, how the specific risks was mitigated through investigation, the successes, those type of things, because that will give your top management a view of how to deal with this going forward for every financial year. And that is how we will deal with that. Integrity, health status report, then the implementation of programs, and that is very important because your advocacy and awareness programs links to your training programs as well. That since a police official, when a police official joins the SAPS and is inducted into the SAPS, that there's already programs that speaks to his mindset from that word go when he enters the SAPS. But so much so there is programs that we have that deals with ethical leadership. And what does this speak to? It speaks to your mindset. One of the biggest problems that I've realized as a corruption investigator for many years in government is there's some arguments where people are saying, no, but pay people more. I'm sure you've heard such arguments, no, pay people more. But what I couldn't understand, and I think Brigadier Steph will agree with me, why did it then happen that we investigated people earning upwards of 3 million per year for tender fraud of millions? If that principle was correct. You'll get a security guard that earns 2,500 a month, but he will protect the smallest little asset in the office that he needs to protect with integrity. So the biggest problem for me, and that is what we need to address through this advocacy and awareness programs, is the psyche of our police officials when it comes to greed and self-entitlement. You know, for some reason, public servants seem to think, if I need to only address one issue, seem to think that they are seriously underpaid. And in these sessions, I address that with them, because you get to a group of people and they sit there and they don't realize that the group sitting there, if you are working in this country, you are one of 6 million taxpayers in a country with 55 million people, where 11 million plus people get social grants. So then you have a clerk earning 12,000 Rand a month, thinking they are very low-level earners. If you go to a person in game or macro or whatever, sitting at the till, they earn 2,500 Rand. Then there's the mindset of the clerk saying that I must sustain an extended family. So does the person sitting in macro or game. They must also sustain an extended family. So it's that mindset that we need to address. Living beyond their means, wanting to drive luxury vehicles when they cannot afford luxury vehicles, putting themselves in a predicament. The bank approves it, but come the middle of the month, they are cash strapped. They cannot get to the work. So get to work, and what? Now they're under pressure. So now they're susceptible to getting involved in corruption. So these advocacy and awareness programs of us speak to those basic things. It speaks to mindset. It actually enables our members to be ethically more strong. That is what this program speaks about. So it also speaks to the code of conduct, code of ethics, specific integrity at work programs, and ethical leadership. It even speaks to small things like, for some or other reason, and that's been the case since we've been young police officials, you will get service stations that offer police free coffee or whatever. Now, these owners of the service stations argue that they are appreciative of the police's service. That's why they want the police there. I've got a different perspective on that, because they obviously get a free security service when the police are around always to get this free coffee or whatever they offer there. So we would want to change that mindset, because it's about the perceptions with the community, isn't it? Why should we get freebies? We're a professional service. I don't need free stuff. You don't get a free coffee. You're sitting here when you get to a quick shop, isn't it? Why must I get a free coffee as a police official, regardless of what service we render? So render a service to the community as well. Whether you're a journalist or whether you're in a university, like Professor Zinn, there's a certain amount of service delivery that you do towards the community. So you are no different than any police official. Therefore, we can pay for the coffee. There's no need for police. So these programs are focused at that. Not receiving gifts in official capacity. I'll refer to that now as well. That's about changing that mindset. Like I said, I'm currently reviewing the anti-corruption strategy of the SAPS, and we intend to enhance it with all these prescripts and also deal with the specific line functions of each of these units so that it can function as one joint effort to address corruption. This is a very important priority that we deal with, and that is detection and conflict of interest management. It's been shown internationally that conflict of interest is one of the biggest risks in terms of corruption. Public officials, but not only public officials, every person that actually get involved in a situation where he's conflicted with his duties, especially public servants. So, in order to mitigate that, the following prescripts have been implemented, and that's broadly in government, and the SAPS is no different. So, we now do financial disclosures. We are on the phase 3 of the financial disclosure process. So, previously until last year, only senior managers, like myself, brigadier and upwards in the SAPS, or a director in upwards in the public service, needed to do a financial disclosure. So you basically disclose shares, you disclose involvement with private companies, remunerative work that you do outside your place of work. You disclose all the assets that you have, registrable assets, vehicles, property, those type of things you need to disclose. That is then analyzed up till now by the Public Service Commission in terms of senior managers, and the Public Service Commission then identify possible conflicts of interest, which needs to be investigated by the specific department. But it's gone further now. So phase 2 is your middle management in SAPS, which is at the level of colonel. They were expected this year by the end of June to submit. And also those officials within the supply chain management and finance environments, because it's high-risk environments. But that is just phase 3. Going forward from next year, every single public servant will have to submit a financial disclosure. So these financial disclosures are then analyzed by our unit, and we identify those high-risk individuals with certain lifestyle issues that we need to then address. And we then use the services of Financial Intelligence Center, amongst others, to assist us to do a proper lifestyle audit on this individual. Obviously, if it's clear that this person is not only a high-risk individual, or we have actually investigated, done a preliminary investigation, and we've determined what the issues is there. Let's say, for instance, the person could have gotten a big inheritance, or his husband, the person's husband or wife is also in a senior position in the private sector, hence a certain lifestyle, then it's sorted out. But we are interested in those officials that cannot give any explanation on those. Then a full lifestyle audit's done, and then they are subjected to a full-fledged investigation by both us and our anti-corruption capacity to deal with these issues. So it is important that we are going to focus much more on lifestyle issues going forward. We also, as a unit, manage the Auditor General, Public Service Commission, and Parliament's queries, if there's any related to the organisation. And then remunerative work. You must remember that in government, the Public Service Act allows for officials to do approved remunerative work outside public service. This typically refers even to things like selling Avon or Justine or whatever. If a person does that, they may not do it in the government's time and using government's resources, they must do it in their private time, but must have approval from their employer. So, through our analysis, we've come to realize that we are of the opinion that there's a very low compliance level in SAPS in terms of disclosing this. So how are we going to circumvent that going forward is, by the end of this financial year, every single police officer must sign a certificate, which will be in the form of an affidavit, where they need to say, I'm not doing any remunerative work, or I'm doing remunerative work, it's approved, or I'm doing remunerative work and it's not approved, and I'm going to realize now that there will be consequences, but I will now disclose it. We need to force our officials to do that so that we can stop them doing this type of work. Then further, we've got a national instruction that prohibits police officials from doing certain types of remunerative work, like the taxi industry, like having liquor outlets, commercial farming, those type of issues that can bring them into conflict of interest with their duties in the SAPS. Security services. I cannot go out and have a private security forensic investigation company whilst I'm the head of the integrity unit and a forensic investigator in SAPS. So those things are not allowed, and they should not even apply for that because it will not be approved. Those officials will immediately be under investigation if those issues are detected. So then a very important thing is the integrity assessments, like I said, which is the lifestyle audit, but integrity testing. those issues that Brigadier Grobler referred to earlier, but going further. We will have a polygraph capability with polygraph examiners. We will walk into a high-risk environment in the morning, 20 financial officials sitting there. They will put their names in a box or a hat, and we will subject 3 randomly to integrity testing, a specific test done on the polygraph. So why do we do that? That's not only about detecting, but let's say, for instance, this specific person is the one in that group that's stealing the petty cash in that office, and that person dodges the bullet that morning. So they do not get subjected to the polygraph. Do you think that person will still keep on stealing this petty cash? No, they won't. So it's a preventative measure as well. That is important for us to do that. And then a declaration of interest register, which we will submit to the DPSA and Public Service Commission, as well as other governing bodies. Then the receipt of gifts. I've already indicated to you that our prescripts will seriously address this going forward, because this freebies must stop. We are not going to allow any zero gifts in return for a service rendered. So I deal with a specific case, and I investigate it very professionally according to this complainant, and this complainant brings me a bottle of whiskey. That is not accepted. It will be regarded and construed as corruption in terms of the Prevention and Corrupt Activities Act as gratification. So we will have prescripts that deal with that specifically, but much more than that, dealing with other issues such as civilities. When you get to a conference like this and I'm offered coffee and tea, that's normal courtesy of my hosts. But yet, we would want police officials, they will be allowed to accept it, but disclose it. That's how we want the levels of integrity within the SAPS. The same when you go to conferences and there's a pen or a folder or whatever. Those things are acceptable gifts in terms of the conference. SAPS, in any case, pay for the conference if they send me to a conference. And let's be honest, the organizers have included that in the quote in any case. There's nobody that gives you anything free in life, isn't it? Even at the bank, you pay service fees, or you have a service fee to get 10 or 20 free withdrawals. But why do you have a service fee? It's not free. It is actually paid for. So the same here, we will have policies, the same with donations. Donations may not be accepted in official capacity unless approved by a divisional commissioner or a provincial commissioner. And there's gift registers that is kept at all offices that they must register these things in, and where the commanders must approve these accepted gifts, not those ones in return for service. The last priority, a very important one, investigative capacity. Now, we are going to enhance the capacity as it is currently. Currently, you have the anti-corruption capacity, and we've been now established the investigative capacity within the integrity units dealing specifically with conflict of interest investigations. Those high-flyer officials that we've identified to be high-risk individuals through lifestyle audits will be investigated by our unit, and where we get to more serious corruption, that's the mandate of the DPCI, of the Hawks. So we're talking here more organized crime related, and then we have a capacity, Brigadier Chabalala, within the detective service that will deal with your normal general cases of corruption. That is where we get a report that the police official is wanting to sell a docket. So we set up a trap, a 252 operation, entrapment, get authorization through the law with the National Prosecuting Authority, and we entrap this individual in a sting operation and we arrest him. That's the day-to-day dealing with corruption, where you get to syndicates that deals with rhino horns and whatever, where you have police officials involved with and prosecutors, where it relates more to organized crime, that will be dealt with by the Hawks. So that is the investigative capacity we'll have, and then like Dr. Johan Burger indicated that within management interventions, which is a total new approach as well, we have the complaints against the SAPS. There is a big capacity built there with various generals that will only deal with those issues. So very important as well, the database. The database that I referred to earlier, where you have a person that's under investigation and then they run away, they resign before they could answer to these allegations, and then next thing you see this person employed in another public service department. We would want to have a database of such officials, but not only such officials, those officials that have been found guilty on corruption, because they go into the private sector again, so that we have a system where you can cross-reference so that we get rid of these individuals that just keep on doing their corrupt activities in other entities or departments. We will establish that whistleblowing capacity that I referred to, and then obviously the consequence management, disciplinary measures that needs to be taken. Okay, so the way forward. We need to do serious public awareness as well, ladies and gentlemen. The reason being, there's a certain mindset amongst our communities that they seem to think, or some individuals, not everybody, seem to think that it is fine to pay bribes or fund corruption. I attended a wedding the other day with where a colleague of my wife got married, so I didn't know 95% of the people there. So I landed up at the table, and people were sitting and joking how they bribed Metro police officers and how they got off for 100 rand. So the actual conversation was who paid less for the biggest speed type of thing. So who scored the most type of thing. And it was clear to me that these individuals, they obviously didn't know what job I'm doing, so I'm just sitting and listening to them. It was clear for me that they saw nothing wrong in their own conduct, that they thought that the Metro is corrupt. So they just got off, and they didn't realize that they are just equally guilty of corruption than the Metro cop that they did this. Regardless of this, if people keep on paying bribes to these cops, it will just increase. So there's a serious public awareness, like we have to do awareness with our police officials, we have to do a public awareness campaign so that people start realizing what they're doing is just equal corruption to what the police official are doing, that is taking these bribes. The same with gifts. Police official don't need a gift if he's done a good job. Give him a commendation letter to his commander and tell the commander that I'm very impressed with this police official, or put it on Facebook or social media if you're impressed with the police. But police officials don't need to get gifts for what they are doing. So therefore we need to adopt a zero tolerance approach. As SAPS, and we've done so, there's a commitment by our top management to have a zero tolerance approach, and you will see it going forward. We will build capacity, and we will adopt a zero tolerance approach. So I always tell the police officials when I do an advocacy session with them, if I need to summarize integrity in one little line, it's what I've indicated there. It's doing the right thing when no one's watching, isn't it? If my commander leaves at 12 o'clock on a Friday and the working hours is still 4, will I leave at 12:30? Or will I stick through till 4 o'clock? It starts with those small issues of discipline and integrity that deals then later in your contact with like your normal criminology work. So it's just doing the right thing when no one's watching. It's easy. If no one's checking on you, are you doing the right thing still? And then changing the ethical culture through ethical thinking, changing that mindset. I always use the example and say that we grew up with Coca-Cola, isn't it? Every one of us sitting here, but yet Coca-Cola put millions into advertising of Coca-Cola. You see it on trucks, you see it on billboards, you see it on television. Why? If I walk into a quick shop, they want me to go for the can of Coca-Cola instead of the can of Fanta Orange. Same with ethics. If you speak ethics, you change your ethical mindset, and your ethical barometers are then enhanced. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's basically my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brigadier Wasserman. So there you have it. There's a lot of initiatives that are taking place. Some of them sound very exciting, very interesting, and we certainly hope that we can have another session in a year's time and see where we're at. But at the end of the day, once again, it's good to hear that there are people that are taking this matter seriously, that are focused on trying to develop the capacity to improve integrity in the South African Police Service, and also recognize that it's quite a holistic approach you need to take. It's not just only investigating wrongdoing, but it's dealing with things like gift, it's dealing with things about understanding ethics, decision making. So thank you very much for that inspiring presentation. Okay, now I'll hand over to Mr. Sissoko from the Independent Police Investigative Directorate. He's the National Head of the Investigations. He's been only asked to speak at the last minute, so he hasn't got a very long presentation of PowerPoint, but we just would like him to give us a little bit of input about IPID and the work they do because they also have a mandate to investigate police corruption. So I'll hand over to you, Mr. Sisoko. Thank you very much for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am representing the Executive Director for IPID. He had been called to a high-level meeting, incidentally dealing with issues of corruption. So I had to quickly pitch in. So I'll be talking off the cuff because I didn't prepare any presentation. But just as a way of background, some of you may know IPID, some may not really know IPID. But IPID was established in 2012. The predecessor to IPID was ICD. And ICD was viewed as not having enough teeth to deal with issues of criminality and misconduct within the SAPS, but also not really giving effect to Section 2066 of the Constitution, which establishes an independent oversight body to look at police criminality and misconduct. And after the realization of the ineffectiveness of ICD, then IPID was born. ICD was established in terms of Chapter 10 of the Police Services Act, and IPID was then established as an independent act outside of the Police Services Act, and it came into operation in 2012. Now, the important provisions of the IPID Act made specific reference to offenses that can be investigated by IPID, as opposed to what was the position with regard to ICD. Now, Section 28 of the IPID Act specifies offenses that can be investigated by IPID. I will refer specifically now to Section 28(1)H of the Act, which refers to IPID investigating cases of corruption against SAPS. And then there is Section 28(2), which refers to IPID investigating cases of systemic corruption. Now, this was a new development in terms of the work that we do, because the legislature saw it fit that not only do we investigate corruption of members within the SAPS and municipal police services, but also we look at systemic corruption that happens in this environment. Now, in terms of systemic corruption, most of these cases, we identify them ourselves. They would normally come through situations where a simple case of corruption is reported to us. And then when we start investigating that corruption, we find that it is actually systemic in nature because of its pervasiveness within a particular station or within a metro police environment, for instance. Recently in KwaZulu-Natal, we arrested quite a number of officers, and we've established that there is a systemic corruption that was happening in that environment regarding licensing. So people who want driver's license would approach the driving school operators, who then work with metro police officers to get people licenses who did not actually pass the test and so forth. So we arrested the driving school operators as well as the metro police officers that were involved. And we find that it was so pervasive that, you know, it was an acceptable thing. You know, a lot of Metro Police officers as well as the driving school companies were actually involved in this. So that is part of what we do. Now, because of the work that we do, it therefore becomes important that the investigators of IPID themselves are investigators who are people who their character is beyond reproach. Hence, in our Act, there is also a provision for integrity strengthening. So my colleagues have spoken about it, that when you investigate these kind of matters, you need to have people with integrity who are dealing with these cases. So our Act provides for that our investigators should be continuously tested for integrity. So we've also established an integrity testing unit within our department so that it can look into, continuously look into the integrity of our investigators, but also importantly, to look also into whether our investigations are done in terms of the law, in terms of our own standard operating procedures, but also where there are allegations, for instance, that our investigations were not properly conducted, then the integrity strengthening unit will conduct those investigations to establish the veracity of those allegations. Now, we decided as a department, most of you may know that ICD, now IPID, has always had a problem with regard to capacity. So in terms of our national footprint, the investigators that we have, it has always been a challenge, and given the work that we do. So we had to make strategic decisions in terms of how we're going to do our work to have more impact, or to make more impact. And in recent times, some of those decisions that we've taken was to say we need to prioritize the investigations that we do so that we look at high impact investigations so that we can make impact that is required because of the limited resources that we have. And part of those decisions was to say we'll prioritize cases of death in custody, death as a result of police action, rape by police officers, as well as rape in custody, and cases, of course, of corruption. And that has also yielded some fruit in the sense that our prioritization of cases of especially of corruption resulted in us getting more people coming forward to us with cases of corruption. Of course, it's been all over the media. Some of the high-profile cases we're investigating against the now removed former acting national commissioner, and the issues that we've raised also in Parliament and about the interference with our investigations and so forth. And interestingly, going to what Brigadier Horbler says, that when you investigate, especially a senior official, it's best that that person is removed so that it enables the investigation to go unhindered. And that was our experience, that there was an interference with our investigation. And since our suspect in this matter, General Pahlane, was removed, we find that the investigation was able to flow quickly. We were able to get information from the police, which before we could not get. it is interesting to note now that the kind of cooperation that we are receiving from the police with regard to the investigation that we are conducting. In fact, some issues are coming up, not even related to this, where people are feeling now more emboldened to come forward with information to say, hang on, there is also some corruption happening in that area, so there is also some corruption happening in that area. Now, this tells us that when you have a management that set a tone that says, we are against corruption and any facet of it, and then will support any endeavor to fight it, you know, everyone in that environment then is now emboldened to say we need to report it so that we are able to clean our environment. So it is our view that corruption is a matter that all of us must be concerned about, and we must do all our best to fight it in whatever area we are. Now, as long as we cooperate as different institutions, especially in the policing environment, then we can be able to defeat corruption. One of the issues, for instance, that we're looking at, in terms of our act, police are obliged to report certain categories of offenses to IPID, like your death in custody, death as a result of police action, and so forth. But there is no similar obligation to report the corruption that is happening within the police. So it's something that we do because someone came to us to complain, or because of our own initiative when we become aware of it. So that's when we get involved. And when you saw the presentation by Mr. Berger, you'll see that the number of corruption cases that we investigated 2015-16 is 112, but that is not the real picture. We are aware that there is more of these cases happening, but they don't get to us because there is no such obligation. In fact, most of them come to our attention after they've been reported to the SAPS and the complainants feel that there is no investigation that is happening in those matters. Then they come to us and say, we've reported this corruption against members, we don't get joy, and that's when we get involved. Now, this supports the notion that it is always better to have a unit or an organization like ourselves, which is not linked to the police management themselves, to be able to deal with these corruption matters. Because, like one of the speakers said, once you have, for instance, a case of corruption, and you ask the very same station where the very same member is alleged to have committed corruption, investigate that matter, you know, even if there was to be any investigation that happens, but there will always be a perception that that investigation will not be properly conducted because of the associations with the colleagues in that environment. So it's always important that the investigation is seen to be an independent investigation, and therefore it will have credibility, that investigation. Now, the kind of cases that we investigate, obviously, based on the kind of capacity constraints we have, we've taken a decision that we will always collaborate with our colleagues in the SAPS to conduct these investigations. Most of the corruption investigations that we do, we also collaborate, for instance, with the DPCI. We collaborate with the CI. so that we get the necessary capacity to assist us in conducting that investigation. I must indicate that, especially in recent times, there's been such a huge support to our work and the kind of collaboration that we have with everyone in our sector, the TPCI, the SAPS themselves, the CI, in terms of investigation. In fact, we've even receiving for the first time information that coming from the CI itself to say, here are the issues that we are facing in our environment, and we think you will be most appropriate to start investigating these matters. And we do those kind of collaboration. In recent time, we also collaborated with the Inspector General of Intelligence, and we've signed also an MOU with him to also look at all the issues that have been raised in the CI environment, including the secret fund and so forth. You know, some of these investigations have been started before, but they have been stalled because there was no will, especially from the management that was there within that environment, to make sure that these matters are properly investigated. Now we got involved. We're doing joint investigations with these institutions to make sure that these matters are concluded. It is important, as I conclude, that if we're to fight corruption within the SAPS, the management must set the correct tone in fighting corruption and maladministration within the police. Some few years ago, I remember, I think Garrett Newman wrote a paper with regard to disciplinary process that happens within the SAPS. And you see, we have had cases, for instance, where we charge a person for corruption criminally, or even rape or any serious crime. But you find that the disciplinary process that is handled by the SAPS, a person is found maybe guilty of that misconduct, but gets only a slap in the wrist, you know? So a person in a court of law get a custodial sentence, but in a disciplinary process, a person only gets something like a suspended dismissal or something like that. Now, these are some of the issues that the SAPS itself need to look at their own internal processes and the disciplinary process and say, are we really doing the best we can, which will enable us to send out a message to our members that we will never allow, as police management, members who are corrupt or members who will continue to misconduct themselves and believe that there's impunity within SAPS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sisoko, also for insights into what the Independent Police Investigative Directorate have been doing. And I think also it's very encouraging to hear that you're getting a lot of support, particularly from various functions within the South African Police Service and from other agencies. I think that's also very encouraging. And I think it also points to the importance of having the heads of these agencies that are seen to be independent and that will investigate without fear or favor. I think that is absolutely crucial. So we have now reached the end of our presentations. And for our online audience, thank you very much for watching the seminar. We are now going to move to a session where we can have discussion and answer questions and answers. And that will be guided by the Chatham House rules, which means please do not attribute a quote to a particular individual unless you have received their permission beforehand. So we will take anybody